Hey everybody, this is Kevin Steinhauser at Fiveable, working with you with AP Line. Today I wanted to just do a quick overview of, again, the highlights, what exactly to expect for AP Line May 15th. We'll look at the time breakdown, and we'll just look at a quick review of each component of the essay. So nothing super new tonight, just making sure I tell my students that we're peaking at the right time. So nothing new, and that should be a comforting thought tonight. Now, what I'll do is I'll talk about multiple choice briefly, and then come back and just answer any questions if there are any. And please ask anything you're thinking. I want everyone walking away, if you're with me live tonight, feeling really confident with exactly what to expect on May 15th. Then I'll do synthesis, pop back for questions. We'll do a quick review of analysis. I'll pop back to answer any questions you all have, and then argument, and I'll pop back. So I don't have, like I said, a lot to cover with you, but I want to just hit the highlights myself and then throw it to you with any questions that might arise as we go. So please, honestly, stay as long as you want. I don't have a ton planned, but I will be here. So hopefully there's some questions that are popping up that you all want to cover. Ask anything you're thinking tonight if you're with me live, and then come back to those 3 cram sessions to look at exactly what the expectation is and how to maximize your minutes. All right, Samantha's asking, what's the best way to divide time between the 3 essays? I'll actually start that here at the pretty beginning, early on in my presentation. We'll do multiple choice really quickly, and then we'll shift to the essays. So I'll probably answer this a little bit more thoroughly in about 10 minutes. But what I'll say now is I recommend kind of going by the book. So that's 55 minutes for synthesis, 40 minutes for rhetorical analysis, 40 minutes for the argument essay. That's all I'll say now, but then I will unpack that for my reasoning and my recommendations when we get to that part of the live session. Samantha, if you want me to answer any more specific part of that when we get there, just pop another question in. But let's go ahead and launch into the presentation. Every component, so multiple choice first, I will come back to see what questions you all have. Again, let's make sure any question you're thinking, ask tonight, and let's walk away feeling we know what this exam is going to be. We know exactly what to do. It's not just what's on the exam that I want to cover. I want everyone walking away after this live session knowing exactly how you're going to maximize your minutes. So I think there was an AP test earlier in the week, and I had a few students come up to me and say, man, I was so confident I finished 15 minutes early, and I feel like I got them right. Well, that should not happen on AP Language. AP Language is one of the hardest tests in terms of timing because everyone's got the same amount of minutes, and it's all about how we're going to maximize them. So that's why I'm doing this logistics game planning live session tonight. You probably already know the logistics. I'll do a quick review of that. But what I want to emphasize tonight is you have a plan for your minutes. So I'm going to give you a possible plan for each part of the essay and the multiple choice round. But then you can personalize it, but know exactly how you're going to spend your time on exam day, which is about a week away. So let's launch into multiple choice. Now, the last 2 weeks on Fiveable, I focused on multiple choice. So this will just be not deliberate practice like we did the last 2 weeks, but again, the mindset, what exactly to expect, and then how to maximize your minutes. So after I run through maybe 5 minutes of multiple choice expectations, if you have any questions as I'm kind of going through the next 5 slides, pop them in to ask a question, and I will come back and answer any before moving on to the essays. So the full length multiple choice is 45% of your exam score, and that's actually weighted quite high because the exam in total is 3 hours and 15 minutes. So the first hour is almost half. So 60 minutes, it technically could be 52 to 55 questions, but I would go in expecting 55 because that has been the trend in the last several years. So 60 minutes, 55 questions, again, nearly a minute a question. Timing absolutely matters. Timing is why multiple choice, in part, is so challenging. There's 3 parts of why multiple choice is challenging, right? So the first is very high, nuanced, comprehension required texts. And these texts are going to be often dry, boring, and on subjects you have barely put much thought into. That's what College Board is going for in this multiple choice. So again, let's find multiple choice from a passage that the student probably hasn't read before. I'd be shocked if you have ever read one of these passages, by the way. And let's find something that they're probably not super interested or passionate about. And let's make sure it's written at a very high level. So that's the first reason why multiple choice is tough. The second reason is because the questions are tough. So we'll talk a little bit about that really quickly. And then third, we got to do it in the timing. I'm very confident that with taking the time cap off, you do better than with a time cap on. Like, that's just a general rule, right? I would do better with unlimited time than if I only have an hour here. So we're going to talk about some game planning, how to maximize our minutes in multiple choice tonight. And then again, any questions you have, I'm kind of just going to hit the highlights. But then any questions you have, let's dive a little bit deeper tonight. So the first minute of the test, I want you to make a game plan. So you expect 4 passages and you expect 55 questions. So you open up the book and you quickly flip through and say, okay, good. I have 4 questions. I'm sorry, that would be nice, right? I have 4 passages. I have 55 questions. So I'm feeling comfortable and confident because that's exactly what I expected. But just take a look, make sure there's no gotcha moments here. And then, and that's what we'll talk about maximizing our minutes. Make a game plan on what order to tackle the passages. Now, if you generally finish on time, if you've done a couple mock exams this year, or full-length practice multiple choice, then maybe it makes sense to go from beginning to middle to end. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, those passages in that order. Because then you don't have to worry about the Scantron. You just start going and filling out the Scantron as you go. But if timing is attention for you, which to be honest, it is for the vast majority of AP language students, I recommend thinking about going from easiest passage to hardest passage. Now, on average, each passage is going to take you 15 minutes. But also look at the number of questions associated. There's going to be a passage probably with 13 questions. There's going to be a passage with 16 questions. And also look at the length of the passage. So on average, you're going to take 15 minutes a passage. You're allowed to take 16 or 17 minutes on a passage if it has a bunch of questions. But at the expense of another passage, you only have 12 or 13 minutes then. With all of that said, keeping all of that in mind, I recommend going from easiest to hardest. And again, taking approximately 15 minutes per passage. So I'm going to talk the rest of the night saying 15 minutes per passage. But again, you can wiggle in one direction as long as you overcompensate in the other direction, right? In terms of the minutes you spend per passage. So the reason it makes sense to go from easiest to most difficult is A, if you start with the easiest, you're going to start to build confidence and momentum on exam day. Now, you don't want to take too long in order to do that. So every second counts. You're going as fast as you can while performing at a high level. But once you have performed well on passage 1, whatever that is for you, the easiest passage, you're building confidence, you're feeling good, 1 passage down, 3 to go. So first is a confidence boost. The second reason why it's beneficial to go from easiest to hardest is, let's be honest, building momentum is not just a confidence boost, it's a literal boost of your score, because you're going to probably get into the zone because passage 1 goes well. If you hit the hardest passage first, your timing might start to slip, and also you might start to get in your head a little bit. So it's not just a confidence issue, it's literally like, are you at your peak? Because the moment you're in your head, the moment you're starting to question yourself and like, am I really ready for this test? So we're trying to avoid all that. The moment that you're in your head, the moment it is where you start to just not be able to do the things right or as well as you normally can. In other words, you might be reading and getting a little bit distracted in your mind. So you want to be peak performance. So starting at the easiest, just make sure you're focused on the right things as well as gaining confidence. And then the third reason is probably the most practical reason, actually. If you have to guess on a few questions, it might as well be from the last passage. So if you have to guess, let's say on 5 questions, you're going to choose, I recommend the letter B. And the reason for that is just because statistically, I found that that's the most common answer on many AP exams. It's not C. C is probably what a lot of you have been taught. College Board knows you've been taught that C is the most popular answer, so they don't do C as often. So C is going to be the answer, obviously. But if you have to guess, I recommend guessing B. With all of that said, we're maximizing our minutes tonight, so we're trying not to have to guess often. So if you have to guess, if you're kind of losing steam, I should say, it might as well be on the hardest passage, right? Now, the ideal scenario is that these are 60 of the best minutes you've had all year, right? So let's kind of talk about that as we go further. Again, I'm expecting 4 passages, so that's 15 minutes each. Again, as you're flipping through, just double check that first 30 seconds of the test. Okay, yes, there are 4 passages. Because if there's 5, it's going to be tougher, right? Because there's 12 minutes each and I've got an extra passage to read. All right, so when I said put them in order from easy to most difficult, do that by identifying the year of publication. The older the year, probably the more difficult the text. That's not a surprise to anybody, right? And then also think about the organization of the text. So if I have a big block of text and it's one big old paragraph, that is a sign that it's a difficult text. Paragraphs indicate to me a shift in topic or tone. Therefore, if there's several paragraphs, the author's doing some of that work for me. The author's indicating to me, okay, there's a slight shift here. If there's a huge paragraph, there's going to be shifts within that paragraph. It's a little bit harder on me to identify them. That I have to do all the identification. I have to do all the work there. So those are the 2 factors. So as I flip through, just say, okay, I think passage 1 is going to be the easiest. I think passage 3 is going to be the hardest. Whatever you see, and then go in that order. All right, and once you've found the order, start with the first passage, and here's what I want you to do. I used to recommend that students, so some teachers might still recommend this, but I don't anymore. I used to recommend that students go and look at the questions first to guide their reading. When I stopped doing that in my classroom, our multiple choice scores have raised significantly, because even like if we had the right intent, a lot of students were looking at the question and then focusing too much on the question. These passages, in order to be most successful, you must read at a high level, and you must focus on reading to read, not reading to answer questions. So I don't recommend doing that anymore. Here's what I do recommend. First, absolutely take the 10 seconds it takes to do step 1. Read the background information provided and start thinking critically about the text. So just kind of ground yourself in the reading. Don't skip over that for sure, please. It's there to help you because these texts are difficult. They're trying to be a little bit friendly with that background info. And then step 2, like I said, this is the most important step of the entire multiple choice exam. You'll do it 4 times because there's going to be 4 passages. Read to comprehend, and then annotate as you go. And I really prioritize the reading. It used to be, students thought I was crazy when I first started to do this. So I've been teaching AP Lang for about 9 years. I made this shift about halfway through my AP Lang teaching. So it's like at year 4 or 5, I said, okay, let's start to read, and let's put more time. Like, let's start to read better, and therefore let's put our time in the reading, not rushing the reading to get to the questions. Because you can do the questions pretty fast if you've dedicated the time with reading and annotating. So that can take you 8 or 9 minutes out of your 15 per passage. So annotations keep you engaged. We've all gotten to the bottom of a page where we're like, okay, I don't know what I read. So annotations don't let you get to the bottom because every paragraph you're pausing and you're making sure you're comprehending. And they also save you time because you're jumping back to your annotations as you are answering the questions. Here's how I think AP annotations should look. You can personalize this for sure, but again, take 8 or 9 minutes per passage to read at a high level and annotate. So a question that I always get is, I don't think I should annotate because it takes me too long. And my answer always is, the annotation should not be taking you long, but the thinking about what to annotate certainly does. But that's a good tension point. So you want to do it as quick as you can. You don't want to get lost in a passage. And sometimes you will have to cut your losses and move on, saying, okay, I don't fully understand this paragraph, but like I already read it twice, I can't move on. You have time to read twice. You don't have time to read 3, 4, 5 times, right? You definitely don't have time to read it once, go back to the go to the question, and then like search for it and read a bunch of texts again. So what you're going to do is annotate like this, and then we'll talk about how to answer the questions really in a time-sensitive manner. So underline key phrases that you do understand, that anchor you in the text, that lead to the main idea or the primary purpose of the text. And then every chunk of text, so sometimes it's a paragraph, sometimes there's 2 or even 3 chunks of text in a paragraph. Remember those long paragraphs that I know we'll see in a week. You identify the shift in topic or tone, and then you just write a quick bullet point summary. If you can't write a quick bullet point summary, it's because you don't understand the text well enough. And that's going to happen to all of us throughout the year. There's no shame in that, but we can't not recognize it. So when I can't write it, I say, oh crap, what am I going to do? I got to ground myself in the next paragraph. And then clarify vague pronouns. That's when you circle it, and you figure out what it is tracking back towards. So you circle the pronoun it, and you draw a line back to the antecedent. That's A, to help you comprehend now, and B, if you have to flip back when you flip back during the question and answer portion, you look at it and you just quickly look at the antecedent and you say, oh yeah, that's what it was. I don't have to go back and do it in the moment, or after the moment, I should say. I do it in the moment of reading. So if I spent 8 or 9 minutes annotating, I have 6 or 7 minutes to answer the questions. And that is about 30 seconds a question, so it's super quick. So every time you're going to read the question stem, and then you're going to flip back to the line that it refers back to, read the sentence or two around that line, look at your annotations, and then you're going to answer the question in your head. Here's what I don't want you to do. This is a time-saving strategy. Don't read A, B, C, D, E until you think you know the answer in your head. If it was a verbal answer or a short written response answer, what would it be? Because once you feel confident, and if you've read the text well, you'll get most of these right in your own words. Then you've got to just put, okay, A, B, C, D, E. Which one best aligns with my words? Now, it's not quite as easy as that, right? Because it's not always going to be exactly the way you would say it, but that's the best way to go, because then you can quickly say, oh, A's way off. You don't have to think about A. B's way off. Okay, C or D, maybe they're right. Maybe there's some parts that are right. So quick note, there's always going to be one answer that's right or correct the entire way through. There's always going to be 1 to 3 question stems, or I'm sorry, answer choices that are partially correct, anywhere from 20% correct to 85% correct. So you're always looking critically, okay, this is how I want you to view A, B, C, D, E. What's wrong with A? What's wrong with A? What's wrong with A? Oh, it's because I'm crossing that out. Okay, what's wrong with B? What's wrong with B? Okay, crossing out B because I found out why it's incorrect. If you do it that way, that's how I want you thinking through the questions. So you have your answer in your head, and you're looking for what's wrong, because there's only one that's going to be right all the way through. All right. We've already talked about this, so I'll just do a quick recap. I recommend guessing B when you guess the entire way. And when you're out of time, guess with 1 or 2 questions. Hopefully you don't have to. But here's the biggest thing. So I'm just jumping into this one. View each passage as a mini test. In other words, you're not taking one big multiple choice exam. You're taking 4 smaller multiple choice exams. Here's why I recommend that. Because when I give a quiz in class, let's say, I give my students 15 minutes to answer 15 questions. If they have to guess on 1 or 2 questions, not the end of the world, right? What happens a lot in AP language is students take so long on passages 1 and 2 that they have to start quickly going through passage 3. And this happens every year. It's going to happen to a lot of students on May 15th. And you're here because you care enough to not let this happen to you. A lot of students have to guess B or C or whatever they choose on the entire passage, passage number 4. And even if it is the hardest passage, if you read it and take some time with it, you're going to get a lot of the questions right, even if it's super difficult. So I'd rather have you guess on 1 or 2 questions from passage 1, 1 or 2 questions from passage 2, 1 or 2 from passage 3, and 1 or 2 from passage 4. Because then you're really thinking about, why am I skipping a question? So hopefully it's not because you just were out of time and you moved on. Hopefully it's because of this. I'm looking at a question. Either A, I have no idea what this question is or what the answer is, so I'm going to take my best guess and move on. Or B, I might be able to get the question right if I dedicate 2 or 3 minutes to it. You don't have time for that. So take your best guess, go with your gut to make sure you get all the way through passage 4. And of course, you can flag number 7 on the exam and say, okay, if I miraculously have a minute left, I'll go back and double check it. But that's not my goal. My goal is to do the best I possibly can for passage 1 in 15 minutes, and then forget about it, and I'm all in on the second passage. Again, whatever I chose as my second passage. So you're keeping a constant eye on the clock. Every 15 minutes, again, you can give or take 1 or 2, should be moving on to the next passage. So let's see what questions we have for multiple choice. Thank you for your questions tonight. So, is it smart to always read the passages? So I know this question probably popped up relatively early on, and I was probably pretty thorough with this, so I won't repeat a whole lot of what I said, but absolutely great question. I highly, highly, highly recommend reading the passages. Not just because I love reading, because really, let's be honest, I don't always love reading these multiple choice passages for AP. They don't want us to always love them. They want us to be able to comprehend them. So 100% without a doubt, I can tell you, you will score better by taking those 8 minutes or so to read and annotate, read to read. The questions are going to fall in line. And I can only say that confidently because the last 5 years in my own classroom, when I have students do it that way, focus on the reading, not the questions, they're scoring at least 20% higher. Sometimes some students are scoring 40% higher or more. So students are doing significantly better when they read to read. Let's be honest, some questions you'll be able to get without reading the passage. That always happens, right? But unlike SAT or ACT, College Board makes these and vets these so well that you really do have to have a nuanced, high-level understanding of the complete text in order to get most of these questions right. Once you have that high-level comprehension, the questions are going to fall in line. And I just started talking about this, right? So Emily asked, compared to the ACT, are the multiple choice harder or easier? Here's how I would like to say that. ACT and SAT, both very similar. Those are college readiness exams. So if you're on the junior level, you're a college-bound student, you'll do well on those. AP Language is a college level exam. So yes, AP is significantly harder. But at the same time, to get a 3 on this test, you need about a 55% on the multiple choice. And to get a 4 on this test, you need approximately, depending on your essay score, but 70%, maybe high 60s. Again, depends on your essays. It's all calculated together. So yes, it's harder, but College Board doesn't automatically expect you to do as well on them, and the grading does take that into consideration. Like I just said a minute ago, because they're harder, and the reason they're harder is because they get to more of the nuance and the flow of the passage. So in the rhetorical analysis really of a passage. So it's not as comprehension based, it's more purpose analytical based. For those reasons, more than the ACT or the SAT, you absolutely need to read the passage well to maximize your score. So the time is best spent looking at the passage, annotating the passage, preparing for that multiple choice round. Okay, when reading and annotating, is it more important to focus on the meaning behind the passage or the analytical and rhetorical components? Oh, that's a really good question, Ryan. So, because I just got done saying this is a rhetorical, so a lot of the questions will be rhetorical analysis. Here's what I would say though. Focus, because these are super tough, so focus on a high nuance comprehension of the passage. So by that, it's main idea and purpose, but you don't have to start to break down, don't read this exactly the same as rhetorical analysis. You don't have to track the author's argument in terms of writing choices and strategies, but you do have to track the flow of the text. So you do want to track, here's the argument, because all of these are going to be an argument, and here's how the argument is developed. But you don't have to do as high level of a thought around the audience and the author. It's really more about the text itself when it comes to these multiple choice passages. So I would recommend spend your initial reading thinking through just that high level comprehension, and then some of the questions will ask you to analyze. But at this point in the year, you guys are all pretty solid. If you comprehend the text well, you'll get the multiple choice questions that ask you to analyze. I'm pretty confident in that. just because they're not super difficult questions once you've comprehended. I promise you, the hardest part about multiple choice is the comprehension piece. Okay, one more question on multiple choice. Should we read the passage and then answer the questions, or the questions and then the passage? Yeah, so I did answer this. I'm sure this probably was posted as I was talking about it. Absolutely. Read the questions. I'm sorry, I said it wrong. Read the passage first and then the questions. I promise you, I've done this in my room. I give students the text. I give them 8 minutes to read and annotate it. I give them a second piece of paper with the questions on it. Now you can look. So like I hold the questions literally back from them. When I do that, again, their scores are better than if I give them the questions up front. So that's just anecdotal, but it's based on 5 years of teaching when I made that shift. So the first 4 years that I taught AP language, I said, everyone look at the questions. All right, what are we looking for in the passage? And they did okay. But when I made that shift, that's when I really started to see a difference in their multiple choice score. So that's why I highly recommend it, because I think it's not just my students every year. It's just the way that the questions are designed. If you've read at a high level, you should confidently get through the questions. And again, if you get stuck in a question, take your best guess and move on. Don't spend more than 40 seconds on a question, because you got to do 30 seconds on average. So to wrap up multiple choice, what I want you to do is focus on reading, get to the questions, read the question stem. Now flip back and just refamiliarize yourself with your annotations in that portion of the text when it's referencing a line. Answer the question in your head, and then see, using process of elimination, A, B, C, D, or E, which one best aligns with your answer. Because if you comprehended well, your answer is probably going to be pretty close. All right, so we're going to shift to essays. So essays, we'll go a little bit quicker through them because I want to get back to your question. So if you think of a question as it comes, it's okay if I'm a little repetitive. Sometimes it's all right to hear some stuff twice as it's like sinking in. So ask your question. First, we're going to do synthesis. Before we do that, though, let's kind of pull back for a minute and talk about maximizing our 2 hours and 15 minutes. So we have 3 essays. We have 55% of the exam. So someone asked a question earlier on, like, what order should I go? And I barely touched on it. Let's talk about it now. So timing breakdown, this is what College Board, or at least, College Board does recommend this, and I certainly do as well. So 15 minutes of reading time. Now, this is just recommended, but this is what I would do. Now, the reading time, I would only focus on synthesis. So you have 6 to 8 sources. You're going to read and annotate through them, and then you're going to figure out which ones are you going to use in your synthesis argument. And I say it very intentionally that way, because synthesis is an argument essay. All right, once that 40 minutes is up, so it's actually been 55 minutes already, take 40 minutes for analysis, and then your final 40 minutes for argument. That's the order that the questions will be printed. Now, what you'll do on exam day is write your essay. You have an essay booklet. In the top right corner, you will literally write 1, 2, or 3. 1 for synthesis, because they call it question 1. 2 for analysis. 3 for argument. So if synthesis is 5 pages, you're going to write 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. You flip the page, you start analysis, or whatever order you go. So you don't have to write them in that order. You just have to label them correctly at the top of each page. Now, when we're thinking about going in order, I generally recommend to my students go in this order: synthesis, analysis, argument. But you don't have to. So let's talk about the pros and cons of both. I recommend going in order, for one, because it's easier to make sure you're on pace as you go. The time warnings will be given as if you're following this time breakdown. So that you will have a 15-minute warning. They'll say, okay, 2 hours left. And you'll know that's a signal to you, I have 40 minutes at this point for each essay. You'll have a time warning with 40 minutes then passed, 80 minutes left. So it's a signal to you, I should be starting my second essay. And then you'll have a 40-minute left mark as well. That means I should be starting my final essay. So it's just helpful to align your time strategies and goals to the test. I'm sorry, to the test proctor's like verbal time warnings. And then second, a lot of you have practiced this all year. My students generally practice this all year. and I've been talking about it all year. So it's just more comfortable when you know exactly the order you're planning on and that you've been practicing for. But some of you might want to go out of order. So it's not about choosing at this point what I would recommend. It's about choosing what's best for you. So you might want to save the essay you're least confident with for last. So a lot of people save rhetorical analysis for last. A, because it's hard for them, and B, because synthesis and argument are both argument style writing. So you might want to write an argument and then write another argument. Again, one's with sources at synthesis. And then shift gears a lot because then you're analyzing someone else's argument. So totally up to you, but know what your plan is and what your preference is. Let's just talk about timing really quickly. If you can pull off synthesis a little bit quicker, a lot of students like to put like 5 or even more minutes onto your rhetorical analysis essay. So you might say, okay, since I have 15 minutes of reading time, I'm going to take 40 minutes for synthesis, and then I'm moving on. That's normal. But you might also say, I have 15 minutes of reading time. I'm going to try to get synthesis done in 35 additional minutes. That adds 5 minutes to the analysis, and I know I might need that because maybe it's my hardest essay, or I just want to make sure I'm dedicating the time to the reading of the analysis passage. All right, so let's start by talking about synthesis. I'm going to go in order of question 1, 2, and 3. After synthesis, and this won't take me more than a few minutes, I'll pull back for any questions you have on synthesis or essay structure. So if you have any questions, please start popping them in. Here's the synthesis essay expectations. So first and foremost, you are writing your own argument. A lot of students think, I've got to cite as many sources as possible. That's not the goal. I've read, so I'm an AP reader. I've read for the last several years. Last year I read the synthesis essay. So this was the 2018 prompt. And I read plenty of essays where students cited all 8 sources. That didn't automatically earn them a better score. In fact, a lot of times if students cited like 6, 7, or 8 sources, they're earning lower scores than the students citing 3, 4, or 5. And the reason for that is because they're citing, and they're not actually arguing themselves. So it's all about, let's go to number 2, your argument and your clear claims. So structure this very similarly to an argument essay. Now, I don't have time tonight to do a deep dive of writing models and what this looks like, but our first cram session, which is coming up on Sunday, is as long as it takes for everyone who's live to feel confident and have their questions answered for a deep dive of synthesis writing. But let's hit the highlights. So you do have to cite at least 3 different sources, and you all should know this since we're so close to the exam. I'm sure you do. But if I cite source A 3 times, that is 1 source cited. So I have to cite source A at least once, source B at least once, source F at least once, whatever those 3 are. And you're choosing those sources based on what best helps you prove your argument. And it's great to make connections between the sources. So in my cram session next week, I'll go over like a model body paragraph. What that should look like ideally is a claim that's not a source. It's always a sign, like for synthesis, of like, okay, don't structure it this way. Source D says blank, because source D is your support. What's your claim, right? So then you can use source D as support, and then you explain and you talk about it, and then you use source A as support. So that's how you make connections between sources. You use 2 different sources to prove the same claim. And then you may connect your background knowledge to a source. That's totally fine. A lot of people ask about that. But the source material should be the emphasis of your support. In other words, you can slip your background knowledge in. In fact, a lot of time that's a signal of a really critical thinker and writer. But don't let an anecdote or concrete evidence from outside the source material take over a body paragraph. The best thing you can do is pair quickly an anecdote or a piece of concrete evidence that you have with a source material, and then unpack them both. When I say unpack them both, this is what I mean. Explain how the evidence, which for the majority of the time is a source, supports your claim. It's all about what you say that matters. So you will get an automatic 4 or lower if A, you for some reason don't cite at least 3 sources, 3 different sources, or B, if your argument is not central. I'm going to do this pretty quickly. Use 15 minutes for reading time or pretty close to it. College Board used to require you to only use those 15 minutes as reading time. They've taken that off, so now it's up to you how you're going to use your 2 hours and 15 minutes, but it's still recommended 15 minutes of reading time. The year that College Board took that requirement away that you didn't have to just read for 15 minutes, you could start writing, synthesis scores dipped, the students rushed the reading. So don't rush the reading, maximize your minutes. This is how I recommend doing it. So you're going to read each prompt page, read the prompt page and then every source, and annotate each source, just looking for the key ideas and then the parts that you might pull out for support. And then just quickly, I highly, highly recommend this. I don't care what it looks like. It shouldn't be super elaborate. But outline your essay. Figure out, okay, what are my claims? And what sources will I use to support my claims? And I've got 40 minutes. This is my last slide here before we roll into questions. You have your, one more slide, you have your 40-minute breakdown. Here's what I would do if I was writing this essay. 7 minutes on an intro, and again, I'll talk more at length on Sunday actually for our cram session on synthesis on what that should look like. 14 minutes on a body paragraph. Again, I'll really do a deep dive of this next Sunday. 14 minutes on a second body paragraph, quick conclusion, and then proofread and revise. I recommend that you proofread and revise the moment you're done writing. Look for mistakes. Just like I asked you with multiple choice to look for what's wrong with A, B, C, D, and E. I want you to have that mindset when you're proofreading. Look for what's wrong in your own essay. If you're patting yourself on the back, you're not proofreading. You're just like proud of yourself, right? Not that you haven't written something worth being proud of, but use that 1 or 2 minutes of proofreading time to critically try to find mistakes. I tell my students this: if you aren't proofreading with a pencil in hand, if you aren't making changes, you're not really proofreading. You're just reading. Okay, so with that said, let's actually answer this. Why do I recommend 2 body paragraphs? Well, I'll show you next week what I think the bar should be for a really solid synthesis body paragraph. And it's pretty long because you have a claim, you have source B, something cited, you've explained source B really thoroughly, you tie in a second source to show that connection of sources, and then you explain that second source. So it's just going to be a lot of writing. Now, so I recommend 2 body paragraphs for synthesis, but you can absolutely do it in any order. There is no rule of how to organize. So 2 to 3 body paragraphs is great. Quality over quantity and quality over structure. What I mean by that, there needs to be a flow to your essay. It needs to be logically organized, but there's no hard and fast rule of like paragraph count. But you must effectively hit the components of synthesis, which is again your argument, so your claims and your thesis, and then finding the support from the texts, and then explaining how the supports prove your claims. So let's look at synthesis questions. Okay, and we are running a little bit long tonight, so feel free if you need to go. This will be posted for replays for 5 Plus members. I just want to get to everyone's questions, so I will be here as long as that takes. So first, should I explicitly write the connection that is shown in a sentence? Here's how I would do that. And again, there's different ways, but here's how I would do it. You have your claim, right? And so the implicit connection is they both are supporting your claim. And that's the most important thing I mean when I say connection. But, so I've talked about source B, I've quoted it, I've talked about it. Then I've talked about source E. A great next sentence after that is, just like we saw in source B, comma, and you can input like more specific details there. And then you go on to explain. So I wouldn't stress out about explicit connection, but that's a really good way to do it. Just like we saw in source B, comma, and then we keep going. The biggest thing is they're both supporting the same claim. Is it necessary to have counter arguments in the argument style essays? There's no hard and fast rule of necessary, but I would say the higher level scores absolutely will address the counter argument. When you do that, this is all that needs to be. It doesn't have to be like a paragraph dedicated to it. It's something like this. While critics might believe blank, and then address their concerns. I would address the counter argument in 1 or 2 sentences in that format in every argument and synthesis body paragraph. And I'm saying you only have to do 2 synthesis body paragraphs. So it's a great question. Thanks for the question. All right, in order to achieve source connection conversation, do we need to explain how sources counter or corroborate each other? This is a good question. Should we simply use multiple sources for the same point? Okay, this is the easier way to do it, right? Using them, like I just said, claim, source B, source A. If something's popping off where you see a connection that you want to address, you can be more explicit, kind of like we addressed a minute ago. However, don't force that, because let's be honest, sometimes it's going to be obvious to you, and part of that's because the sources make it obvious. There will literally be times when source A you read, and source B is literally a rebuttal of source A, for example, right? So or address further support for source A. So there's going to be times, but I wouldn't say make this a requirement for you. But if you see an obvious connection or conversation, it only helps to bring explicit attention to it. But don't stress if you can't do that. If you have claim and then 2 sources that back it up with your own arguing explanation, you're going to be just fine. All right, so my teacher said that the synthesis essay is like a conversation between people who have different opinions on a topic. Yeah, so I think what your teacher probably means by that is, and Jasmine, tell me if you have a follow-up question, let me know if I'm wrong and just kind of re-clarify for me. But what I'm thinking she probably means, or he probably means, is you have 8 sources and they're 8 different people talking about the same topic. And yes, that's absolutely true. And then here's kind of a really good way, hopefully your teacher's kind of getting here. Here's a really good way to think about that. You're adding the 9th voice to the topic. So yeah, you're talking about, yeah, source A said this, source B said this, but ultimately, here's what I say. And that's what this is all about. So yeah, let me know if you have a follow-up question to that one, Jasmine. All right, for Sunday, is that one of the videos we have to pay for? Yes, cram sessions are the last 3 for 5 Plus members only. Again, I believe pricing has changed a little bit, but I believe it's like $5. And again, you can get all 3 cram sessions. All right, do you suggest 2 body paragraphs for the rest of the essays as well? Actually, yeah, so I'll go over those pretty quickly here, and then we'll pause for questions. But what I would do is, yeah, 2 or 3 is what I'll say, and it really depends on you with timing. Let's be honest, 3 great body paragraphs are better than 2 great body paragraphs. But here's where my push is, because again, it's maximizing our minutes. 2 great body paragraphs are better than 3 decent body paragraphs. So you absolutely need 2. I would never say just write 1 really good one, because again, that's an organizational thing. You want at least 2 claims. With that said, let me just put it this way: 2 great body paragraphs should be your goal. If you can do 3, that's like icing on the cake. That's how I tell my students. So because my students, when they want to get to 3, the quality of their body paragraphs often fall a little bit short. What I mean by that is that like they rush first and second body paragraph to get to the 3rd one. I actually tell my students, until you've written a 6, only write 2 body paragraphs. That way you're getting the quality piece down. All right, David asks, what's my favorite essay? My favorite essay to grade and probably to write is the argument essay, just because there's so much more freedom in what you're writing, because you can use any evidence you want. All right. Should you have a paragraph dedicated to the counter argument? You can. Like I said maybe a couple minutes ago, I actually recommend just slipping it in to like towards the end of your explanation for each body paragraph, and that goes for synthesis and argument. So with that said, and the reason I think that is because it's just a better flow. Like you're actually like expanding on your explanation for your claims, as opposed to saying, here's what some people believe, here's why they're wrong. Like you can say, here's what I believe. I know that people might not disagree with me, but again, this is why I believe it. It just allows you to be a little bit more thorough with your own claims. Then again, you can still pull off the 2 body paragraph format. So intro, 2 body paragraph conclusion, because you're addressing the counter argument as you go. All right, so Eliza asks, can you explain how to synthesize a bit more? In which essays do you need 3 paragraphs for a higher score? I'm going to pause there because there's a multi-part question. So there's no essay that you need 3 body paragraphs for. I'll say it again. You can write a 9 with a 4-paragraph essay, absolutely. It's just got to be super thorough and high quality. But in general, 2 body paragraphs is going to get the job done if they're done really well. 3 great body paragraphs is still going to be even better, right? So if you can pull off 2 awesome body paragraphs, great. If you can pull off 2 awesome body paragraphs and you have 10 minutes left, write a 3rd awesome body paragraph. Let me read the rest of your question, and then I can come back to the synthesis part. Because for the argumentative essays, my teacher says we should have a paragraph on our knowledge, reading what we've done, and a current event. But I was wondering if you can absolutely still get a high score with 2 body paragraphs. I'll be honest with you. This is a strategy. It's not an automatic strategy. What he is focusing on is a blend of evidence, and I will focus on that with the argument essay too. But you can have 2 body paragraphs as long as they're explained well. Great. So I'll address synthesis here, and I will say this though, just to for those of you who do want to see the entire session tonight, just remember I'm coming back Sunday for a much deeper dive of synthesis, and I'll answer every question you have there as well, and we'll make sure like we're going even deeper. But again, here's what I mean when I say synthesize. Look for connections between sources, but really prove your own point. So again, I keep doing this. This is your claim. Source B says this. This is why source B proves my point. And if source B disagrees with you, you can absolutely call out why source B is wrong. So that's kind of another way in synthesis only that you can address the counterargument. Source B says this, but have they thought about X, Y, Z? All right, so that's all I'm going to say on that because we're going to unpack that a lot more. And I do want to get to the other 2 essays tonight. And we got some more questions here. So on both argument style essays, so synthesis and argument, is it safer to either oppose or defend the prompt rather than qualifying? That's a great question. Is it safer? Yes. But is qualifying often better? Yes. So if you want to like try to get like a textbook 5 or 6, like out of that 1 to 9 scale, it is easier to say I fully disagree or fully agree. But College Board's language actually is shifting to say instead of agree, disagree, or qualify, to take a position on. So that's what I expect you to see this year. Because they want it to be more authentically your position and your ideas. That's part of what you're assessed on. So with all of that said, I'm pushing you to qualify. And here's how I push you to qualify. While X, comma, Y. In other words, while it's true that blank, on the whole, blank, right? So I'm saying blank, blank, just because we're not looking at a specific prompt. But when you qualify, be specific on what you believe. Don't just say, yeah, I kind of see both sides, the end. And that's the trap of qualifying. And that's why it's not always safe to qualify. So qualifying opens up doors to higher scores often. And you can, again, absolutely get a 9 if all you do is oppose or defend. Don't hear me wrong. But usually that's a sign of someone who isn't thinking as fully about the topic. And again, there's exceptions to that rule for sure. So again, when you qualify, be explicit on what you believe and the parameters of what you believe. So while X, comma, Y. You're welcome. All right. Any tips on how to analyze more rather than summarize? I find it's a habit I have. The more I analyze, the more I'm summarizing a support example. Yes. Now, using the word analyze, I'm going to talk about this in the parameters of synthesis still. What I would talk about, instead of analyze, I would use the word explain, right? So again, you're explaining how the evidence proves your claim. Now, next, on Sunday, I keep saying next week, but it's like in 4 or 5 days, right? So I'll be back on Sunday with you all. If you want to come for the synthesis cram session, we're going to go a lot deeper. And I'm going to show you a body paragraph with here's a quote and here's my really thorough explanation and here's why it's a high score. So with all of that said, here's what I would say. You're going to paraphrase or summarize, whatever you want to call it, a sentence or two for the source, but then it's up to you to talk about the source. So just like you would an argument, just maybe write a practice synthesis paragraph sometime. And then I actually make my students do this at the beginning of the year. Highlight every sentence that's your own thinking. And if it's your own thinking, you know you're doing the right thing. If you keep, and I sometimes do two colors. So highlight in blue someone else's thinking, highlight in green your own thinking, right? And really looking for, am I doing the thinking here, or am I just putting someone else's words on the paper? In a nutshell, it takes practice to get good at it, but that's how I would double check yourself. And be honest, like, is this really my thinking, or am I really just paraphrasing? Okay, one more question, and then we're going to jump to analysis. I think the questions have been really good, so I'll go even quicker through my analysis, and then let's see what other questions you all have for analysis. I know there's a lot of analysis questions often, so we'll see what you all have for me tonight. But would we score higher with the use of certain words, like saying against, I'm sorry, I wrote it wrong, assist instead of help? Yes, this is a good question. This applies to all three essays. Writing style is certainly a piece of the puzzle. So holistic scoring, all that I'm talking about tonight is the more important pieces. But the difference between a 6 and a 7 is often writing style, or the difference between the 7 and the 8 is often writing style. So you want to be quality in your thoughts and your explanations first. You want to be thorough second. And then the third thing we're looking at is your sentence structure, the flow of language, and the word choice itself. And I actually did a live session. So if you're a 500 Plus member, I would go back and look at my live session on using effective diction in your own writing. And what that was all about is this. Use the most precise word. Don't use a fancy word. So yours that you cited, assist, is not a fancy word, right? Everyone in the world, okay, that's a little bit exaggerating. Everyone at the live session tonight, though, knows the word assist. That's just a little bit more precise to what you're talking about, in this theoretical example, than the word help. Same with obtain and gain. So use the most precise language possible. That is a sign of a good writer. It's not going to tip the scales more than a score point, most likely, but it can be the difference maker between a 6 and a 7. Let's jump back to rhetorical analysis. Thanks for all the questions, guys. I'm happy to stay as long as everyone's questions answered. Let's go to analysis. Very quickly, I'm going to do this quickly, as I'd rather answer your questions tonight. Always remember the rhetorical triangle. Subject, audience, audience, speaker, speaker, subject, and the relationship between all three. And my emphasis has been, I think, the most underrated side of the triangle, or the most important side of the triangle, is subject, audience. So let's talk about that tonight. So the rhetorical task is identify and explain what is effective about a particular argument. So you're reading someone's argument, and you're thinking, okay, why would this argument have been effective? So in order to do this, you must do three things. Identify the primary purpose, identify the most important writing choices the writer makes, and consider how these writing choices would impact the intended audience. This is key. A lot of students stop at the first two. In order to open up high-level scores of analysis, it's all about the audience. So you might have to do some inference on who would the primary audience be here. Depends on the topic, but always try to figure out who's the audience. Use that background information they provide, a sentence or two to kind of ground the work, to guide you to figure out, okay, who's the intended audience here. And again, let's talk about that audience subject side of the triangle. So I want you to think about this. What does the audience likely believe about the subject before reading the work? And how does the author carefully consider the audience's projected beliefs in order to do one of two things? So the author is either setting out to reinforce the audience's beliefs or to change a mindset. And often it's going to be a combination of the two, or it could be all one or all the other. So it's a very common strategy, so look out for this, for the audience to begin the speech or the work by reinforcing a belief, saying, hey, we all agree on the same thing. And then to shift or to end the work with trying to change the audience's mindset. So yeah, we all agree on this. Let's establish that. Now that we've established we're pretty much on the same page here, let me challenge you to think about this one particular thing differently. So think about that. But again, it's going to be a combo or mix and match of the audience is going to try to have a reinforced belief. I didn't say that well. The author is trying to reinforce the audience's belief, or the author is trying to change the audience's mindset. And a really high level reader and analyzer, which you are, is going to figure out what is it. So again, here's what I want you to do. I just got 2 more slides here. I want you to have a mindset of maximizing your minutes, and I want you to walk in on May 15th knowing how you're going to spend every minute. Like, if you know your game plan, you're going to try to stick to your game plan. So you have 12 minutes to read the text. And again, this is if you have 40. I know some of you might go a little bit quicker on synthesis to open up more time for the reading here. But 12 minutes, that's the most important part, because if you misread the prompt, you're capped at a 4. If you misanalyze, if you say something that's just wrong, you're capped at a 4. And that's why analysis is tough, because people write really good essays sometimes and then say something off, even if it's just a sentence, they're capped at a 4. So be really careful to read closely and correctly. Take 6 minutes or so on your intro. Again, you can absolutely do 2 body paragraphs. We'll do a deep dive on like organization and how to do this effectively on Monday. So that's our second cram session. And we'll spend most of our time, I'll show you like some sample writing, and I'll answer all thorough questions you all have. And then again, same as on synthesis, quick conclusion, and then proofread, and then forget about it. So for proofread, and then literally never think about what you wrote again. Seriously, because then you're moving on to your argument essay. You need all brain cells focused on that thing. All right, how to annotate for rhetorical analysis. Underline the most important phrases in order to comprehend in the margins. I'm sorry, I kind of started to say in the margins. In order to comprehend every paragraph is what I should have said there. So you're underlining just to ground yourself in the text, and then it's a little bit different than multiple choice, as I said earlier. So in the margins, you're not writing for main idea. You're writing for what are the writing choices that are happening. Not terminology, just he starts by blank. And then look for a logical pattern. The best essays often do this. Here's how the author starts, and here's why. Here's how the author shifts, and here's why. And here's how the author ends, and here's why. But the here's why needs to happen. I know I'm going over that quickly because we've been here a while. Okay, I don't see any questions. I know I'm going quick. I'll just kind of wrap up argument. I know we kind of talked about all 3 essays in the questions here. So I will do argument, and then if there's any questions on either analysis or argument, throw them on up. So we do have just some time to make sure we're thinking about analysis correctly. My recommendation is come to the cram sessions and maybe just on your own, hop on College Board's website, see all the sample released prompts, and then just figure out, okay, let me write a body paragraph, let me feel good about it, let me be fresh on it, and then come to the cram session and make sure you're doing it right. And you can kind of compare your writing with my model writing and then ask any questions you have. You can even, in a question, pop in, like, here's a couple sentences of analysis. As an AP reader, what do you think? I've graded rhetorical analysis, I believe, 2 years. So my biggest takeaway for that is it's so easy to be kicked down to a 4 because of a misread. So again, really focus on your 12 minutes of reading and understanding the text. All right, let's quickly do argument. I know that we're getting on our hour point already, so it's gone long, but I appreciated the engagement and the questions. Hopefully it's been useful, just as like a high level, big picture review. So again, our last cram session will be the night before our test. So if you're stressing, this is a great way. The best way to deal with stress is to do something about it. So you'll actually be a little bit less stressed on on Tuesday, if you hop on Fiveable and just start going through this. Okay, this is all review. I know what to do. I'm feeling good. All right, by doing something, you're actually going to alleviate stress. Here's the argument expectation. They're going to look similar to synthesis, and that's very intentional because both synthesis and argument are an argument. So first, you articulate your argument. You make it very clear. That's the most important thing. And you have a nuanced perspective. Kind of goes back to the conversation we had about qualifying. So I push you all to qualify with that caveat of don't just say, yeah, I see both sides. That's not qualifying. That's not having a position. College Board's lingo is probably going to say take a position. So a lot of people who qualify actually are doing the opposite of that. They're not really qualifying. They're not taking a position. They're saying, yeah, I see both sides. So you're saying, while this is true, this is also true, or this is usually true. Let me think of an example really quickly. So while it's true that there are some exceptions to the rule, comma, for most people, the more they practice, the better they get at a skill. Something like that would be a more nuanced qualifying perspective. All right, and then two, and again, I know I've already fielded some questions because synthesis and argument are so intertwined, but selecting appropriate evidence. And you want to select a blend of evidence. So we'll talk about that more thoroughly on Tuesday night when we're all in on argument. But if you choose two pieces of evidence, one's about your sister, one's about your mom, that's not the best blend of evidence, right? Because they're both like literally very close to you. Better would be, here's a personal anecdote, and here's this trend also seen in history. So I'm looking at, here's the types of evidence. I've got current events, I've got historical evidence, I've got personal evidence. Those are the three most common types of evidence. You can absolutely also talk about literature, but that often, and again, this is not a hard and fast rule, but talking about literature is often not used well. I'm just saying that as like a trend. So there's a joke that some AP readers say of like, oh, I don't know what the prompt is going to be this year for argument, but I know I will be reading about The Great Gatsby every day because students just know The Great Gatsby because a lot of juniors across the country or the world are taught that book and read that book, and then it ends up in the essays every year. So the point being, don't force the evidence, A, and B, recognize that literature or a movie, because I read about the Hunger Games every year. I read argument, even though the topics change, right? So a book or a movie is fine evidence, but recognize that there's probably better evidence out there. So you really want to find the best possible evidence. With all of that said, if you do use the Hunger Games or Harry Potter or whatever, say, recognize in your essay, it's a sign of a really thoughtful thinker here, this fictional trend, call it what it is an example of a trend in the real world. Like however you want to say that, and then talk about the real world as well. Don't write an entire essay about fiction. That's pretty weak, right? Because if you're trying to prove something, the best evidence is not going to be Harry Potter and Katniss Everdeen, right? The best evidence is going to be something in our world today. Now, fiction can represent the truth, but then call it what it is. Tell me that in your essay. Fiction, this piece of fiction represents an actual truth, and let's unpack that. All right, and then I bolded step 3 or component 3. It's all about this. Go back to my highlighting lesson that I do in my class. Write an argument paragraph, and then highlight it this way. Highlight in one color. What's my concrete evidence? How much concrete evidence? How many sentences are just detailing the evidence? And then highlight in another color. Now, when am I actually talking about the evidence? When am I doing the thinking versus just summarizing what happened? And it should be the majority in that color doing the thinking. And again, nuanced perspective, I kind of tied that into the articulate argument. And then someone brought up the question of like word choice. So effective writing style is certainly a piece of the puzzle here. This is my last slide, and then we'll see any questions that are left tonight. Again, this is my plan A. If I was writing the essay, this is what it would look like. A little bit less time here because there's less reading to do. So 6 minutes to read and plan, but really take a full 5-6 minutes. Plan out your essay. I see this every year, no matter the essay style. Students start off pretty strong and then just fall apart. Again, this happens every year. So that's because students like think of something really quickly and then just run out of gas and don't have like a second good claim. So don't start your essay for argument until you know what your claims are and you know what's the best evidence that you can think of that you have a lot to say about that supports your claim. Okay, next week on Tuesday, so actually a week from tonight, will be our final cram session. I'll show you what a good intro can look like and how to try to emulate that the next day on May 15th. And then again, we'll look at some body paragraphs. So write 2 or 3 body paragraphs. Again, go in knowing how many you expect to write. It depends really on how fast you can write, and you know that at this point in the year. So 2 great body paragraphs is better than 3 decent ones. And then again, you're writing a conclusion, and then you're proofreading and revising, actually looking for mistakes. Okay, we do have some questions. I see some activity in the chat, but I'm gonna just look at these questions. So if there's anything going on over here, make sure it's over here if you want me to address it, just so I can make sure I hit all of these. So, how do you conclude a rhetorical analysis essay? I know the essays need to be incremental, but how do you close one off? Yeah, so on Monday, when we're doing our rhetorical analysis cram session, I'll actually show you a model conclusion. But in a nutshell, here's how to conclude a rhetorical analysis. Don't write a rote conclusion. That actually doesn't help. So a lot of teachers actually say don't even worry about a conclusion, because if you write something generic, it's actually not helpful, right? And by generic, I mean like if you just repeat what your thesis is or something. So here's what I want you to do, and I'll show you an example of this on Tuesday. After reading Blank's work, after listening to Blank's speech, however you want to start that based on the prompt, what I want you to do is after blah blah blah, the audience would likely, and then finish that thought. So what is the audience leaving with big picture? What idea was either reinforced, or what idea was maybe mindset shifted? Okay, so you just kind of looking at big picture. Again, it doesn't have to be long. 3 or 4 sentences is fine. And I'll show you an example of that in a few days here. We're getting really close. How long is AP test? So again, we've got 60 minutes of multiple choice, 55 questions, short break, and then right back at it, 2 hours and 15 minutes for 3 essays. And again, the time breakdown that's recommended is 15 minutes to read the synthesis sources, and that means you have 2 hours left, so you have 40 minutes per essay at that point. And again, I recommend that's your timing strategy. You can tweak it a little bit, but that's how the proctor is going to be giving you time strategy. So it is helpful to know that. All right, tips on how to prep for the analysis essay. I haven't gotten the practice in class for a while. I know I need to do some studying. So the best thing, like I said, write a practice or 2. Go hop on College Board's website. They have all the previous analysis prompts there. I would just jump into writing a body paragraph for each one. That's probably all the practice you need at this point. If some of you want to do a 40-minute timed write on your own, that makes sense too if you're worried about the timing. But if you're worried about the skill, go ahead and just do a body paragraph. And again, I guess I'll say it this way. The highlighting strategy I love. So highlight, when am I just quoting Barack Obama, whoever's the author, right? And then when am I actually talking about what he says? When am I doing the thinking versus the author doing the thinking? All right. What's the best way to briefly summarize a work of literature that is not a classic the AP readers will already be familiar with? Okay. Well, again, I'm going to frame this conversation by saying don't feel the need to. It's better to talk about real world evidence than fictional evidence. However, if you have something that really works, just say in the novel blank and underline the novel title because it's a full work, and then just in one sentence say what the novel's about, and in the second sentence tie it into the prompt. So let's just use Harry Potter for example. Obviously the readers know who Harry Potter is, but let's pretend he doesn't. In J.K. Rowling's series, underline Harry Potter, a bunch of wizards are fighting the bad guys. Wow, that was a terrible summary. You'll do better. And then you jump into the topic. So let's say the topic, again, let's just use my very generic one. Practice makes you better. So throughout the series, the more that Harry practiced defense of the dark arts, the stronger and more confident he became. And then I just start unpacking in my explanation why it was valuable for him to practice. So hopefully that was, in a nutshell, what you were looking for. All right, is it true that the argument essay prompt usually includes philosophical questions? I would say this. I would have to go back and like double check. I'd say it's definitely a trend, but I wouldn't say it's a definite. So usually it's kind of an ambiguous term. I would say here's the best thing you can do. Go to College Board's website. At the end of the session, I will pop it into the chat So you guys can just use that as a link if you're not sure how to get there. And then just go and look at the most recent 5 AP argument questions, and you can kind of identify the trends for yourself. I think that makes a lot of sense. So sometimes they're philosophical, sometimes they're more like straightforward. And I think honestly it depends in part like what your definition of philosophical is. So some like what I might consider philosophical, you might not. Good question though. Like what I would push you to is like let's remove the philosophical term from it and just say, okay, what kind of questions have they been asking? And it'll probably be something pretty similar. And again, what I really want to push you on is all of you. It's not going to be defend, challenge, or qualify most likely. It's going to be take a position. So it's all about what you believe. A couple more questions here. How should we propose a counter argument in the argument essay? Should we do a separate paragraph or should we embed counterpoints? Yeah, just like we talked about with synthesis, you can do either way. But I think it's a sign of a higher level paper to subtly and quickly address the counter argument. So here's how a paragraph could go. Claim, concrete evidence, explanation of claim. So let's just use my Harry Potter example. Practice makes you better at something. Harry Potter practiced. Here's why practice made Harry Potter get better. And then you'd say, well, some might argue that, and then you finish that thought and counter that thought. So while some might argue that Harry Potter was naturally gifted, there's no denying that he was better at Defense of the Dark Arts after years of practice than before. Something like that. So you're just slipping it in to kind of end your explanation. I think that's not the only way to do it, but I feel like that's the way to maximize your minutes. You're doing it in every paragraph then. All right. If I read the argument prompt and my mind literally goes blank, is there anything I can do or is it pretty much over? Oh no. All right. Sometimes I can't think of anything. Here's what I would say. I tell this to my students all the time. So walk into the test or the exam confidently. You all know enough. So the skill is not having background knowledge, although the more you have, the easier this is, right? But all of you have enough. The skill is searching through your head, okay, what actually works here? So I would say, and honestly, that's why Great Gatsby is often used, because like, okay, well, I know Great Gatsby or whatever it is, right? So I would say walk in knowing like the best thing's going to be current events. So know some current events that have been happening, not one-time things, but trends. So an example of that is the Me Too movement, or Black Lives Matter, or the Iraqi-Afghan war, like things that are not just like current events, like one and done, but like societal like shifts essentially. So you walk in confidently being able to talk about those 3 things, and not just those 3, but like things like that, and you're going to be able to build some claims off of a prompt. And also, here's what I tell my students. Ideally, you're talking about real world evidence, like from concrete sources, not your life. So I tell my students, worst case scenario, you tie it to your personal life. So I would recommend, I think the sweet spot's this. Paragraph 1, claim, and then you have the concrete evidence is a current event. And then paragraph 2, claim, and then the concrete evidence is a historical event. So I think that's like the sweet spot of like, it's a trend throughout time. But if I can't think of like a history event or even a current event, worst case scenario for my students is I talk about my own life, or I talk about like my uncle's life, or like more of a personal anecdote, because then I have a lot more wiggle room. So I would say just think and like don't rush into the writing. Breathe, take your time. It is over if you start writing and don't have concrete evidence, right? So take your time and really think, okay, what can I make work here? What do I have stuff to say about? All right, is making grammar mistakes a big deal? It depends. So if you make one grammar mistake, it absolutely does not matter, and because it's holistic scoring. We know that this is like a timed rough draft essentially, but if you make 50 grammar mistakes, it is a big deal, right? So it's all holistic. What the language of the College Board rubrics say is, if it detracts from the meaning of your ideas, it is a big deal. So if you have a spelling mistake or 2, it's not going to kill you at all. If you have mistakes in like every other sentence, it will absolutely detract from you. So it is kind of like on a curve. It's on a spectrum of impact. But I would say be careful. Don't make as little mistakes as possible. But again, the majority of your score will come from the things we've been talking about tonight in terms of the content of your ideas. All right, a couple more questions. If the prompt says take a position and you instead qualify, will your score go down? My teacher has really emphasized qualifying. Okay, let me clarify if I wasn't clear earlier. Qualifying is taking a position. My push is when I said that earlier, people who tell me they qualify or think they're qualifying often aren't. So College Board wants you to qualify, but to do it the right way. So it's again that while x comma y. It's not. Sometimes it's okay to be, it's okay to practice, and sometimes it's not. Like that's too vague, right? So when you qualify, it would be something like this. While it's true that there's some experts who need less practice than most, in general, the more you practice, the better you'll be. Something like that, right? So what I don't want you to think qualifying is wishy-washy. Yeah, I see both sides. I want it to be a very clear position that you have. So let me know if you need a follow-up. Just pop another question, and hopefully that answered yours, Eliza. Last one. All right, any way to avoid writer's block? Something I'm worried about. So go in confidently and breathe and take your time in terms of like the planning. Don't write an essay. Don't start writing an essay until you know your claims and your evidence. Because it might be scary, and like don't freak out. Just trust yourself. If you're taking like a minute or two just sitting there thinking and like brainstorming. What's scary, and this is when writer's block actually happens for most AP students, is you write a beautiful like 10 minutes of an essay, and then you don't know where else to go. So you're actually going to avoid writer's block by pre-writing, by outlining. It doesn't have to be long, but start your essay only after you know exactly where you're going to start and where you're going to end. All right, guys, thanks for all the questions tonight.